My name is Peggy, and I am from Central Florida. And I have a question in regards to when Joseph was living in Egypt, and he brought Jacob and his family there because of the famine. Yet when the famine was over, because the famine only lasted a total of 7 years, why didn't Jacob and his family return to Canaan, which was the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Why did they remain in Egypt? I would just like your thoughts on that and see what you think.
Peggy, thanks for listening to Wisdom for the Heart there in Central Florida. We were glad to hear from you. Stephen, this is a really interesting question because we know that remaining in Egypt resulted in them becoming slaves.
Yeah, that's true. And it is a good question, Peggy. Thank you. There are pragmatic reasons they stayed in Egypt. Frankly put, it's easier for them to live there. Goshen, you remember, that's where they were settled. This is a very fertile land. It's in the Nile Delta region, and it would be protected naturally from catastrophe that would require, the Nile River to dry up. And so this is just a great place to live. The land of Israel, on the other hand, was dependent on rain that may or may not come. It's God seems to specifically send it if they get it. In fact, in Deuteronomy 11, you read in verses 10 to 12, "For the land that you are entering to take possession of is not like the land of Egypt, from which you've come, where you sowed your seed and irrigated it like a garden of vegetables. But the land you're going over to possess is a land of hills and valleys, which drinks water by the rain from heaven, a land that Yahweh your God cares for. The eyes of Yahweh are always upon it." So he's contrasting the land of promise as a dry, arid land that's going to require rain, and God's going to have to send it, where Goshen was just naturally fertile. It was also not only easier to live in Egypt, but it was safer to live in Egypt. Egypt was what we would consider the first world power. This is a feared powerhouse among the people of the land. And Canaan was a war zone for Egypt and their rivals. The Promised Land was a war zone for the Babylonians. And so you have these very pragmatic reasons why it'd be better for them to stay there. But now the most important thing is the prophetic reasons. God makes it very clear in Genesis 15, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs and will be slaves there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on that nation they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. They shall come back here," that is the land of promise, "in the 4th generation." So God is, by the way, teaching the Israelites through this 400-year period of time that he's going to be faithful to his promise, the prophecy of their return. He's also going to use it as a time to judge the Amorites as they return back to the land. They're not ready to be judged, he says in Genesis 13. Their iniquity is not yet complete. So part of returning to the land is God's prophecy of judgment on the unbelieving nations. There's also an interesting passage in Genesis 46 where God says, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation," God is telling Jacob. "And I myself will go down with you into Egypt, and I will bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes." So God is using the fertility of Egypt to allow the descendants of Jacob to prosper and multiply. Remember, they're going to come in about 70 in number, and they're going to leave at about 2 million. And in the end, they don't move back after the famine because Egypt was appealing, but because God had determined that they would remain in Egypt so that he could demonstrate his love, he could demonstrate his mercy, he could develop Israel into a major nation before he brings them back. So I hope that answers your question. Great question. Thank you for sending it in.